He thought he could humiliate me in front of everyone, splash water, and walk away like the star of his own show. The crowd laughed, cameras rolled, and he soaked in every second of his so-called victory. But what happened just minutes later had him on his knees, begging for forgiveness. Let's break down how it all went so wrong. The morning in Newport's bustling city square started like any other. Sun shining, tourists clicking away at their cameras, and the air buzzing with chatter from school groups on field trips. It was one of those picture-perfect days that made you think, nothing crazy could possibly happen today? Ashway. Spoiler alert, it was exactly the kind of day where things went sideways. Standing as steady as a rock outside the Royal Historical Museum was Jason Crawford, 26, in his sharp navy blue uniform. Jason had a reputation for being unshakable, both in his stance and in his temperament. He had one job, keep things under control, even when chaos had other plans. And trust me, chaos was warming up in the bullpen. Enter Richard West, a 34-year-old entrepreneur who screamed midlife crisis with a platinum card. He strolled onto the scene wearing a watch so shiny it could blind you from across the square, accompanied by a group of equally loud, overconfident friends. Richard had that vibe, you know the type. The guy who'd call himself the life of the party while everyone else called him a headache. He clearly didn't come to Newport for the history. Spotting Jason at his post, perfectly still and composed, Richard saw an opportunity to show off for his entourage. "Hey man," he hollered, sauntering closer with a bottle of overpriced sparkling water in his hand. "What are you, some kind of statue? Let's see if you're as tough as you look." Jason didn't flinch. He dealt with his fair share of rowdy tourists, and this one didn't seem any different, at least not yet. But Richard, oh no, he wasn't stopping at words. Before anyone could react, Richard tilted his water bottle and splashed a generous amount right onto Jason's crisp uniform. The crowd gasped. Phones came out faster than you could say viral moment. Jason stayed rooted to the spot, his face like granite. But if you looked closely, you could see his jaw tighten. His eyes, steady and calm a moment ago, flickered with a spark of restrained fury. He took a slow, measured breath, the kind that says, "You're lucky I have self-control." Richard, oblivious to the growing tension in the crowd, threw up his hands in mock innocence. "Relax, dude. It's just water. Don't be so uptight." His friends laughed nervously, clearly not as confident about the situation as their ringleader, but the atmosphere had shifted. People whispered to each other, and the energy in the square went from lively to uneasy. Tourists who had been admiring the architecture were now glued to the unfolding drama. Some looked outraged, others curious, but all eyes were on Jason and Richard. The crowd wasn't just watching, they were judging. Jason, still holding his ground, stared at Richard, his gaze unwavering. It was a look that said, "You don't realize what you've just started." And while Richard soaked up the attention like it was a performance he'd rehearsed, the whispers around him were turning into a tide of disapproval. Richard didn't notice. Of course, he didn't. He was too busy basking in his own arrogance, completely unaware that his joke was about to cost him more than he could ever imagine. Jason didn't budge, not an inch. He stood there, his expression like carved stone, staring at Richard with the kind of calm that could either defuse a situation or send shivers down your spine. That wasn't just a glance from a museum guard. It was a silent reminder that actions have consequences, and the bill always comes due. "Sir, please step away from the entrance," Jason said, his voice as steady as ever, a quiet authority that demanded respect. He wasn't yelling, wasn't even raising his voice. Jason knew better than to feed the fire. But Richard? He didn't get the memo. He tilted his head, smirking like he'd just been dared to double down. And double down he did. Taking a few exaggerated steps forward, Richard reached out like he was going to tap Jason's shoulder, as if this was some schoolyard prank. "Oh, come on, buddy," Richard said, his tone dripping with condescension. "What's the big deal? You're acting like I'm about to break into the museum." Jason didn't flinch. Not when Richard's hand hovered inches from his uniform. Not when the murmurs in the crowd grew louder. His calm was unshakable, but anyone paying attention could see the tension tightening his jaw, the subtle shift in his stance. He wasn't moving, but he was ready. Enter Merton Pearson, senior security guard and seasoned handler of chaos. At 52, Merton had seen it all: rowdy teens, entitled tourists, even the occasional protest outside the museum. But as he approached the unfolding drama, it was clear this wasn't just another day at work. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to stop," Merton said, his tone firm but not aggressive. It was the kind of voice that said, "I'm giving you a chance to walk away. Don't make me take it from you." Richard, however, wasn't in the mood for walking away. He laughed, loud, sharp, and meant to draw attention. The kind of laugh people like him used to assert dominance. "Relax, man. It's just a little fun," Richard said, throwing his arms out theatrically. "What are you going to do? Arrest me for having a sense of humor? This is entertainment, folks." The crowd wasn't laughing. In fact, the vibe had shifted entirely. People weren't just watching anymore. They were recording, whispering, and some were even frowning in disapproval. Phones were held high, capturing every moment, every word. Somewhere in the crowd, a teenager muttered, "This dude's about to get himself canceled," and his friends snickered nervously. Meanwhile, Jason stayed silent. He didn't need to say anything. His presence was enough, but Merton wasn't about to let Richard keep pushing buttons. "This is not acceptable behavior," Merton said, stepping in just enough to put himself between Richard and Jason. "I'm asking you one last time to stop." Richard rolled his eyes, clearly unfazed. "You guys are taking this way too seriously. It's not like anyone's getting hurt. Chill out. This is just a show for the tourists." And then came the moment that tipped the scales. A young woman in the crowd, her phone already live streaming, turned to her friend and whispered just loud enough, "This guy thinks he's untouchable. Let's see how that works out for him." Within seconds, her stream lit up with comments, and people in the square started sharing the feed faster than wildfire. Merton's phone buzzed in his pocket. A notification popped up on the screen. "At Newport Daily tagged you in a live stream. Disrespect at the Royal Museum." At the same time, a small group of local activists, there to promote an anti-discrimination rally scheduled for later that afternoon, caught wind of the situation. Spotting the commotion and hearing the words disrespect and museum, they immediately moved closer. These weren't the kind of people to stand idly by when injustice was unfolding. As they approached, the energy in the square shifted again. The crowd grew larger, the whispers turned into murmurs, and the cameras kept rolling. Richard, still basking in what he thought was his moment of glory, had no idea that his little show was about to go from a local spectacle to a full-blown public reckoning. The police arrived within minutes, their flashing lights cutting through the square as the crowd instinctively parted. Jason remained still, his expression composed, while Richard's confidence visibly cracked. The man who had been so smug moments ago now looked like someone trying to find a way out. "Sir, step over here," one of the officers said, motioning Richard aside. "What? Me?" Richard's voice wavered, his bravado slipping. "This is insane. I didn't do anything wrong. It was just a joke." The officer, unimpressed, responded with a calm authority. "We've received multiple complaints and will be reviewing the surveillance footage from the museum entrance." The color drained from Richard's face. "Footage? What footage?" "The cameras by the entrance," the officer replied, holding up a tablet. "They record everything." As the officer began reviewing the video, Richard's excuses tumbled out in a desperate stream. "It's not what it looks like. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. Come on, this is being blown out of proportion." But the evidence told a different story. The footage, combined with the countless videos now circulating online, painted a clear picture of Richard's actions. The whispers in the crowd grew louder as people shared clips, their phones lighting up with comments and reposts. "This guy really thought he could get away with it," someone muttered, their words capturing the general sentiment of the onlookers. One of the officers turned to Richard, his tone matter-of-fact. "Based on what we've seen, we can charge you with public harassment and disorderly conduct." "Charge me? You're kidding, right?" Richard's voice rose in disbelief, but his protests fell flat. The reality of the situation began to set in, and for the first time, he looked genuinely panicked. Nearby, a group of local activists, originally gathered for a planned rally, saw the commotion and joined the crowd. One of them, a young woman with a megaphone, seized the moment to address the gathering. "This isn't just about one man's poor behavior," she began, her voice carrying across the square. "It's about respect, for workers, for individuals, for humanity. Jason isn't just a guard. He's a human being who deserves dignity, no matter his uniform. The crowd erupted into applause, their energy shifting from passive observation to active support. Signs and banners, initially meant for the rally, were now raised high with messages like "respect is not optional" and "dignity for all." Richard, realizing he was entirely out of options, turned to Jason in a last-ditch effort. He dropped to his knees, his voice cracking under the weight of desperation. "Please," he said, barely audible over the noise. "I'm sorry, I acted like an idiot. I didn't mean to disrespect you." Jason stared at him for a moment, his face unreadable. The silence was heavy, and the crowd held its breath. Finally, Jason spoke, his voice steady and calm. "It's not me you need to apologize to. You disrespected everyone here who believes in fairness and dignity." Richard's face crumpled, but Jason didn't wait for more. He turned and walked back to his post, his head high, his composure unbroken. As Richard was led into the police car, the crowd erupted into cheers and applause. The incident, already viral, was being shared and discussed far beyond the square. Jason, however, wasn't interested in the attention. He returned to his duties, the same calm, steady presence he had always been. To him, this wasn't about recognition. It was about standing firm in the face of disrespect and reminding the world that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. How would you have handled the situation if you were in Jason's shoes? What are your thoughts on the story? Have you or someone you know experienced something similar? Share your thoughts in the comments below, give this story a like, and let's keep the conversation going. This story was created to shine a light on important issues, raise awareness, and inspire positive change. Your opinion matters, and together we can work toward a more respectful and fair world.